Corruption in politics, this Islamic leadership model. What if I told you that the very system meant to protect you, to serve you, to honor you, is often the very system that betrays you? Think about it. Politicians promise justice. They promise prosperity. They promise honesty. And yet, scandal after scandal, corruption after corruption, our trust is shattered. Now here's the question I want to plant in your mind today. Is corruption inevitable? Or is there another model of leadership, one we've forgotten? Imagine walking into a grand palace, gold on the walls, marble floors, servants at every corner, and then you walk into a tiny room at the end of the hall, and there, the leader of the nation is sleeping, not on a golden bed, not even on a mattress, but on the hard floor, with just a stone as his pillow. This is not a fairy tale. This is Umar ibn al-Khattab, the caliph of the Muslim world, one of the most powerful men of his time. And yet, his leadership was built on humility, not corruption. Service, not selfishness. Let's compare that to today. Modern politicians often see leadership as a ladder for personal gain. Public money disappears. Promises evaporate. Truth becomes negotiable. Think about it. How many times have you heard of leaders hiding millions in offshore accounts while ordinary citizens can't even afford basic health care? It feels like the system is rigged, doesn't it? And here's the bitter truth. Corruption survives because we've normalized it. We shrug and say, that's just politics. But is that leadership or is it exploitation? Now, let's open another door. The Islamic model of leadership flips the script completely. In Islam, leadership is not a privilege. It's a trust, a burden, an accountability before God. The Prophet Muhammad said, the leader of a people is their servant, not their master, not their exploiter, their servant. Let that sink in. A true leader isn't measured by how much wealth he gains, but by how much he sacrifices. And look at history. Abu Bakr as Siddiq, the first caliph, was known to cry at night, terrified he might fail in his duty to the people. Can you imagine today's presidents losing sleep over their citizens' hunger? Think of leadership like a father protecting his children. A real father doesn't steal from his children. He sacrifices his comfort for theirs. That's how Islamic leadership was designed. But corruption is like a father who eats while his children starve. It's betrayal at its core. So I ask you, do you want politics as usual? Or do you want leadership that reflects justice, service, and truth? The Islamic model isn't just history. It's a timeless blueprint, a reminder that power is a trust, not a trophy. And if we dare to demand it, if we dare to live by it, we can build nations led not by greed, but by guardians. Remember this, you are not just an audience. You are the generation that can rewrite what leadership means. And when you choose justice over corruption, you choose history over hypocrisy. You are the future. Corruption in modern politics often turns leadership into exploitation instead of service. Islamic leadership views power as a trust and a burden, not a privilege. True leaders like Umar ibn al-Khattab lived with humility and accountability. In Islam, leadership is about serving the people, not enriching oneself. Corruption survives because societies normalize it and stop demanding honesty. Real change begins when citizens demand accountability and leaders fear their responsibility before God. Corruption in modern politics often turns leadership into exploitation instead of service. And the tragedy is that many people no longer even find it shocking. It has become like background noise, the hum of a machine we all hear but have learned to ignore. Yet if you pause, really pause, and imagine what this means for ordinary lives, it becomes unbearable. Picture a nation where a young mother walks miles to fetch clean water for her children because the local water project funds were siphoned away into the pockets of officials. Imagine a father working 3 jobs and still unable to afford his child's medicine because the money allocated to hospitals vanished into a luxury apartment in another country. This is not fiction. This is happening every single day. And it shows us how corruption transforms leadership from a shield into a sword that stabs its own people. Politicians step onto the stage during elections with dazzling promises. They speak of roads, schools, healthcare, and dignity for the poor. The words flow like honey, soothing ears hungry for hope. But the moment they secure power, the honey turns bitter. Promises become distant echoes, almost as if they were never spoken. Instead of building the roads, they build palaces. Instead of fixing the hospitals, they fix offshore accounts. Instead of feeding the hungry, they feed their greed. And the most dangerous part is that the people, weary of broken promises, whisper to themselves, "That's just politics." The normalization of betrayal is perhaps more dangerous than betrayal itself. Take a step back and look at history. Power has always been a test of character. When Abraham Lincoln said, "Nearly all men can stand adversity, but if you want to test a man's character, give him power," he wasn't speaking in theory. He was describing a reality we continue to see. Leadership magnifies whatever sits in the human heart. If the heart is hungry for wealth and status, power becomes a highway to corruption. If the heart is anchored in justice and service, power becomes a platform for greatness. Sadly, what we see in much of modern politics is the former. Think of a politician as the captain of a ship. The citizens are the passengers, trusting that he will steer them safely through storms. But a corrupt leader is like a captain who drills holes into the deck to fill his own barrels with water, ignoring the fact that the ship is sinking. The passengers scream, but the captain pretends not to hear. He smiles at them during speeches, waves from the top deck, and assures them everything is under control. Meanwhile, the ship tilts closer to disaster. This is what corruption feels like for citizens who believe in their leaders only to be betrayed again and again. In many countries, stories of stolen billions are whispered in cafes and shouted in protests. Money meant for schools disappears into private jets. Budgets for hospitals transform into vacation homes. Relief funds for disasters evaporate while victims sleep under torn tents. What makes this unbearable is not just the theft, but the arrogance. Leaders stand before their people, dressed in expensive suits, speaking of sacrifice while their watches alone could feed an entire village for months. The gap between words and actions becomes so wide it no longer feels like a gap. It feels like a canyon. And when corruption becomes systemic, it poisons everything it touches. Justice becomes negotiable. Laws are bent for the powerful and sharpened against the weak. A poor man who steals bread for his children might rot in jail, while a politician who steals millions is given titles of honor. The irony is breathtaking. Citizens learn quickly that fairness is not guaranteed, and slowly their hope in justice dies. When hope dies, apathy takes root. And when apathy spreads, corrupt leaders thrive because no one bothers to fight them anymore. But what makes all this even more tragic is that leadership was never meant to be exploitation. Leadership, in its purest form, is supposed to be an act of service, a sacred trust. People lift a leader onto their shoulders, not so he can tower above them, but so he can see further, guide better, and protect more. Yet corruption twists that trust into chains. Instead of carrying the people, the leader climbs onto their backs, weighing them down while he reaches for more riches, more influence, more comfort. The bitter irony is that those who exploit the system often justify it with polished speeches. They say things like, "We must make tough decisions for the greater good," while quietly ensuring those tough decisions never touch their own families. The ordinary citizen bears the cost. While the politicians' children study abroad, their families enjoy private health care, and their wealth multiplies in hidden accounts. Leadership, instead of being the greatest act of sacrifice, becomes the greatest act of selfishness. And yet, amid all this, the haunting question remains: if leadership was designed to be service, how did it become synonymous with exploitation? Perhaps it is because we allowed corruption to become familiar, to become expected, to become so ordinary that when a leader actually delivers, we treat it as a miracle instead of a duty. Islamic leadership views power as a trust and a burden, not a privilege, And this idea changes everything once you let it sink into your heart. Imagine for a moment that you are holding a fragile glass bowl filled to the very top with water. One wrong step, one careless movement, and it spills. Everyone around you is watching, waiting to see if you will protect what has been placed in your hands or let it shatter. That fragile bowl is what leadership represents in Islam. A trust from God and from the people, heavy to carry, dangerous to mishandle, and judged not by how much you enjoy it, but by how faithfully you protect it. When the Prophet Muhammad said, "The leader of a people is their servant," it was not a poetic phrase meant to impress an audience. It was a radical redefinition of what power means. In a world where kings sat on thrones above their people, where rulers were worshipped like gods, here came a voice declaring that the one on top is in truth the one at the bottom, carrying the weight of everyone else on his shoulders. It was never a crown, it was always a chain of responsibility. Leadership in Islam was not meant to elevate a person above others, but to press him down into the soil of humility so he could lift others higher. History preserves scenes that almost feel unbelievable today. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, the first caliph, would leave his home at dawn to personally milk the goats of his neighbors. When someone asked him why the leader of the Muslim world would do such tasks, he answered simply, "I will not stop doing what I used to do for them before." Think about that for a second. The man responsible for a rapidly expanding empire still worried about the morning milk of his neighbors. That is not privilege, it is burden. That is not a throne, it is service. And then there is Umar ibn al-Khattab. One night, he walked the streets of Medina in disguise, checking on his people. He heard a woman boiling water with stones inside to quiet her children's hunger. Umar wept, realizing his people were suffering while he, the leader, had eaten his fill. The next morning, he carried a sack of flour on his own back and refused to let anyone help. When told that someone else could carry it for him, he replied, "Will you also carry my sins on the day of judgment?" That is what it means when power is a trust. It is not the comfort of sitting in palaces. It is the sleepless nights of wondering whether someone went to bed hungry under your watch. Contrast this with how leadership is often seen today. For many, winning office is like winning a prize, a trophy to display, a ticket to privilege. They see it as an opportunity to live above others, to command respect, to gain wealth. But in the Islamic model, the moment you become a leader, your life is no longer yours. Your time, your wealth, your energy, even your comfort, all belong to the people. You are accountable before God for every hungry stomach, every broken road, every injustice that happens under your authority. This is why Imam Malik once said, "Leadership is not sought, it is fled from, for it is a responsibility that will crush the careless." Think of leadership in Islam like a shepherd and his flock. The sheep cannot speak for themselves, they cannot defend themselves, they cannot find their own pasture without guidance. The shepherd's role is not to eat the sheep or exploit them, but to guard them from wolves, lead them to nourishment, and stay awake at night while they sleep. The Prophet reminded us of this when he said, "All of you are shepherds, and all of you are responsible for your flock." If every parent is accountable for their children, then how much more accountable is a leader for an entire nation? And yet, the beauty of this model is not just in its moral demand, but in its spiritual depth. Because leadership is seen as a trust, it means that no matter how high you rise, you are never untouchable. You can build the tallest palace, but you cannot escape the gaze of God. You can silence critics, but you cannot silence your own conscience when it wakes you in the night. The true leader is haunted by the weight of this burden, not intoxicated by its privileges. He knows that every decision he makes will either testify for him or against him on the day of judgment. The stories of early Islamic leaders are filled with examples of this mindset. Ali ibn Abi Talib would often remind governors that justice was not an option, but an obligation, writing letters that warned them of arrogance and corruption. He told one governor, "Do not be a voracious beast over your people, or else you will devour them." What leader today speaks with such honesty to himself, reminding his own soul that leadership can turn into devouring if not restrained by humility? This is why in the Islamic tradition, people used to fear being chosen as leaders. It was not a career path or a glamorous destination. It was almost like a heavy mountain placed on one's back. Many companions of the Prophet wept when they were given positions of authority, not because they doubted themselves, but because they understood the terrifying accountability that came with it. Imagine living with that awareness every day, that the cries of the oppressed, the hunger of the poor, the loneliness of the widow, all might rise against you before God if you failed them. That is the essence of leadership as trust and burden. It is not about how high you climb, but about how heavy you carry. Umar ibn al-Khattab lived with humility and accountability, and his example shatters the illusions we often have about what it means to hold power. He was the ruler of an empire that stretched across continents. Yet if you saw him walking in the streets of Medina, you might mistake him for an ordinary man. No guards surrounding him, no crown on his head, no lavish robes trailing behind him. Just a man with worn clothes, a simple demeanor, and a heart that trembled with the weight of responsibility. Power never blinded him, it broke him into greater humility. And that humility was his strength. There is a story that captures this so vividly. One day, Umar was seen sleeping under a tree, alone, without guards, without a palace to shield him. A foreign envoy who came to visit him was stunned by the sight. "You rule with such authority, and yet you sleep unguarded on the ground?" he asked in disbelief. Umar replied with words that still echo across centuries. "You ruled with injustice and feared your people. I ruled with justice and my people protect me." That moment holds more power than all the thrones in the world, because it shows that true authority does not come from weapons, walls, or wealth. It comes from the trust of the people and the sincerity of the leader. But Umar's humility was not just in his lifestyle, it was in how he treated accountability. One of his most famous statements was, "If a mule were to stumble on the road in Iraq, I fear Allah would ask me, 'Why did you not pave the way for it, Umar?'" Think about the depth of that. He was not only concerned with people, but with animals, with roads, with the smallest details of justice. Compare that to leaders today who dismiss massive failures as minor mistakes. For Umar, a mule stumbling hundreds of miles away was enough to keep him awake at night. That is what accountability looks like when it is rooted in fear of God and love for justice. Imagine a leader today who checks the price of bread in the market to ensure no merchant is cheating the people. Umar did exactly that. He would walk the streets in disguise, blending into the crowd, listening to complaints, observing conditions. He did not wait for reports on polished paper. He saw reality with his own eyes. One night he overheard a mother trying to quiet her crying children by boiling water with stones, pretending food was being prepared. Umar broke down in tears, realizing the hunger his people were suffering. He ran to the treasury, carried a sack of flour on his own back. And when someone offered to help, he refused, saying, "Will you carry my sins on the day of judgment?" He knelt beside that mother, cooked the food with his own hands, and stayed until the children fell asleep with full stomachs. That is what leadership looks like when humility and accountability replace ego and entitlement. And his humility extended to how he handled criticism. There was a time when Umar stood before the people and said, "If I deviate from the truth, what will you do?" A man stood up and replied, "We will straighten you with our swords." Umar did not rage, did not silence him. Instead, he thanked God that there were people in his community willing to hold him accountable. Imagine a president or a king today inviting such bluntness and praising it instead of silencing it. It is almost unthinkable, yet Umar normalized it. He wanted to be reminded that power did not place him above correction, that even as caliph he was still a servant of God, still answerable to his people. Another time, when Umar was distributing clothes from the treasury, people noticed that his garment looked longer and finer than the rest. Suspicion arose. He stood before the crowd and explained that his son had given him his share of cloth to add to his own so that it would fit his size. He did not dismiss their doubts as disrespectful, nor did he demand blind trust. He gave a transparent explanation, because in his heart, leadership was never ownership, it was stewardship, and every steward must be accountable. What made Umar's humility so powerful was that it did not weaken his authority, it magnified it. People obeyed him not out of fear, but out of love and respect. His justice made his word weightier than armies, and his sincerity gave him a moral authority that no throne could buy. In a time when leaders are often surrounded by walls, guards, and layers of luxury, Umar's life stands as a living argument that real leadership is not about building distance between ruler and ruled, but about removing it. Picture the contrast. Today, many leaders hide behind tinted cars, unreachable by the people they claim to serve. They deliver speeches written by others, shaking hands only with those selected for photographs. Their citizens may see their faces on posters, but never in person. Omar was the opposite. He was present, accessible, vulnerable, ready to be questioned, ready to be challenged, ready to carry a sack of flour on his own back, because he believed accountability before God was greater than any worldly privilege. That is what made him unforgettable, not just as a ruler in history, but as a timeless example of what leadership could be if humility and accountability were its foundation. ChatGPT said in Islam, leadership is about serving the people, not enriching oneself. And this single truth changes the way we should imagine power. Imagine walking into a village where a new leader has just been appointed. Instead of banners with his face or grand speeches demanding loyalty, you see him rolling up his sleeves, helping rebuild a broken well, sharing food with the poor, listening to the voices of the elders and the cries of the children. He is not there to be worshipped. He is there to serve. That is the model of leadership that Islam laid down, a model where authority is not measured by how many people bow to you, but by how many lives are lifted because of you. The Prophet Muhammad himself gave the clearest example. Despite being the messenger of God, the leader of a growing community, and the final prophet, he never lived like a king. He mended his own clothes, milked his own goat, and sat among his companions as though he were one of them. Once when a man came trembling before him out of respect, the Prophet calmed him, saying, "Relax, for I am not a king. I am the son of a woman who ate dried meat." Imagine that humility, the most honored man in history, reminding people that his greatness was not in wealth, power, or privilege, but in service and sincerity. This was the foundation upon which the Islamic leadership model was built. True service is not glamorous. It does not shine in photo opportunities. It is often hidden, quiet, and tiring. Think of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, the first caliph. He was once seen entering the house of a poor, blind woman every morning. A neighbor, curious about what Abu Bakr was doing, entered the house after him and found that he was cleaning, cooking, and preparing water for her daily needs without ever mentioning it to anyone. This was the leader of the Muslim world, caring for a single blind woman in secret. No headlines, no rewards, just service. Can you imagine a modern president doing that without cameras, without press, without the need to be noticed? That is the difference between serving people and using people. When leadership is about self-enrichment, it poisons everything. Citizens become tools. Laws become shields for the powerful. Wealth becomes hoarded in hidden accounts, while the poor starve in the streets. But when leadership is service, the roles reverse. Leaders become tools for justice. Laws become protection for the weak. Wealth becomes a trust to distribute fairly. That is why Caliph Ali ibn Abi Talib once wrote in a letter to one of his governors, "Know that you have been appointed over the people, not to dominate them, but to serve them. They are your brothers in faith or your equals in humanity." His words carried a vision far greater than political power. They reminded leaders that their worth is measured not by how much they gain, but by how much they give. Serving the people requires sacrifice. Umar ibn al-Khattab, despite ruling over vast lands, lived so simply that he patched his own clothes and ate basic meals. When asked why he did not live more comfortably, he said, "How can I care for myself when so many people under my rule go hungry?" He understood that leadership meant feeling the pain of the people, not hiding from it. That pain was his responsibility. That hunger was his hunger. The leader and the people were inseparable, bound by trust and accountability. Now think about how different the world would look if leaders lived by that principle today. Imagine if every official who signed off on budgets walked the streets at night to see how the poorest live. Imagine if every politician who promised healthcare spent a day in a crowded public hospital. Imagine if every minister who approved food policies sat with farmers, ate what they ate, and heard their struggles firsthand. Service transforms leadership from a position of privilege into a mirror of reality. It forces those at the top to feel what those at the bottom endure. The Prophet once said, "The best of leaders are those whom the people love, and who love the people, who pray for them and for whom they pray." Love between leader and people is not built on fear or wealth. It is built on trust, honesty, and sacrifice. That kind of bond cannot be bought. It must be earned through consistent service. The people must feel deep down that their leader would never betray them, that he would rather go hungry than see them suffer. And this is why the Islamic leadership model still resonates today. It is not just a system of governance. It is a moral contract. A leader in Islam cannot claim victory if his people are in despair. He cannot measure success by wealth while children go hungry. His success is measured by how many lives he has improved, how many injustices he has removed, how faithfully he has carried the trust given to him. Leadership is not a throne to sit on, but a load to carry. Those who understand this truth shine in history as examples of greatness, while those who ignore it become footnotes in the story of corruption. Service is the soul of leadership, and without it, power is nothing but an empty shell. The leaders who served their people became immortal in memory, not because they demanded loyalty, but because they gave loyalty first. They became unforgettable, not because of their palaces or armies, but because of their willingness to stoop low, to sacrifice, to serve. And when leadership is service, it is no longer about ruling over people. It becomes about standing with them, carrying them, and never letting them fall. Corruption survives because societies normalize it and stop demanding honesty. And that silent acceptance is perhaps more dangerous than corruption itself. It begins subtly, almost invisibly, like a small crack in a wall that no one pays attention to until the entire building collapses. At first, people are outraged when a leader is caught stealing. They protest, they demand answers, they speak with fire in their voices. But then, when nothing changes, the fire cools. They shrug their shoulders, shake their heads, and mutter, "That's just how politics works." In that moment, something far worse than theft occurs, the theft of hope. When dishonesty becomes routine, the people adjust. They begin to expect lies during campaigns. They assume money will be stolen from public projects. They anticipate broken promises as if they were part of the package. Corruption stops being shocking and becomes background noise. The politician who cheats is no longer seen as a criminal, but as clever, cunning, even admirable in his ability to escape consequences. Children grow up hearing their parents say, "That's the system, nothing will change," and they inherit the same resignation. This quiet surrender creates fertile ground where corruption flourishes, because leaders understand they can betray without consequence. Think of a city where a bridge collapses because funds meant for construction were stolen. Families grieve, workers lose faith. But after a few weeks the story fades, life goes on. The politician responsible is never punished. He smiles at the next election, waves to the crowd, and campaigns with more promises, and the people, weary of disappointment, still vote for him. Not out of love, but out of habit. They convince themselves that all leaders are the same, so why fight? This resignation is the oxygen corruption breathes. History shows us that great changes never come from leaders alone. They come from people who refuse to normalize injustice. When the Prophet Muhammad began his mission in Mecca, he was surrounded by a society where dishonesty was common, where the strong crushed the weak, and where cheating in trade was routine. He did not simply accept that this is how it has always been. He challenged it by example, earning the title Al-Amin, the trustworthy, long before he became a prophet. His integrity was so radical in a corrupt environment that even his enemies left their valuables in his care, knowing he would never betray them. That is what happens when one person refuses to normalize dishonesty. He forces others to recognize the standard of truth. But when societies lose this standard, corruption thrives without resistance. Imagine a nation where roads are filled with potholes, hospitals lack medicine, and schools crumble because the funds intended for them have been siphoned away. People complain in whispers, but no one demands accountability. Some even admire the politician's wealth, saying, "If I were in his place, I'd do the same." The moral compass shatters. What was once condemned as betrayal becomes admired as success. And slowly, dishonesty becomes a culture. It does not have to be this way. There are moments in history where people refuse to surrender to corruption, and those moments changed everything. Think of Umar ibn al-Khattab standing before the people and allowing them to question even the length of his shirt. The crowd demanded answers, and Umar gave them transparently. Imagine if they had stayed silent, accepting whatever he said without question. Accountability would have died on that day. But instead, the people insisted on honesty, and their insistence kept leadership pure. This shows that corruption is not only a test for leaders, but also for societies. Leaders steal because they believe the people will tolerate it. They lie because they believe no one will challenge them. They exploit because they sense the resignation in the hearts of the masses. But when people refuse to be silent, when they demand honesty with persistence, corruption begins to suffocate. It cannot survive in the light of scrutiny. The danger of normalization is that it numbs the heart. At first, dishonesty shocks us, then it irritates us, and finally, it becomes part of the landscape. Just like walking through a polluted city, the smell may overwhelm you on the first day, but after weeks, you stop noticing. That is what happens with corruption. We stop noticing, we stop caring, and in that silence, the corrupt grow bolder. Every society has to ask itself a hard question. Do we want leaders who serve us, or do we want to be ruled by those who exploit us? The answer is not in their hands. It is in ours. Because every time we excuse a lie, every time we ignore a scandal, every time we re-elect the same corrupt faces without demanding accountability, we send a message that dishonesty is acceptable, and that message is what keeps corruption alive. The truth is, no society is perfect and no leader is flawless. But the difference between a society that grows and one that decays lies in whether its people normalize corruption or challenge it. The moment dishonesty becomes ordinary, the moment betrayal becomes expected, the seeds of collapse are planted. But the moment people refuse to lower their standards, the moment they demand honesty as a non-negotiable truth, the culture shifts. Leaders rise to the expectations of the people, or they are replaced by those who will. So the survival of corruption is not just about greedy leaders, it is about silent societies. And the cure is not only in punishing the corrupt, but in awakening the people, reminding them that dishonesty is never normal, never acceptable, never something to shrug off. It must remain shocking. It must remain intolerable. Because only then will corruption begin to wither under the weight of accountability. Real change begins when citizens demand accountability and leaders fear their responsibility before God. And this truth is what separates nations that thrive from those that collapse under the weight of corruption. Leadership has always been a reflection of the people. A dishonest society rarely produces honest rulers, while a society that demands integrity often finds it. Leaders are not born in isolation. They rise from among us, shaped by the culture we tolerate and the values we uphold. If citizens are silent, leaders become bold in their wrongdoing. But when citizens raise their voices and remind their leaders that authority is a trust, not a trophy, something powerful happens. Fear enters the hearts of those in power, not fear of people alone, but fear of the one who sees everything. Picture a ruler seated in a grand hall, surrounded by advisors, wealth, and influence. Outside the palace walls, the people suffer. They line up for bread, they plead for medicine, they beg for justice. If those voices never reach the hall, the ruler convinces himself he is untouchable. He believes his wealth can shield him, his guards can protect him, his power can silence all opposition. But when those voices grow louder, when people gather together and remind him of his duty, when they tell him openly that he will stand before God one day and answer for every tear and every hunger, suddenly the walls of his palace feel thinner, his bed less comfortable, his nights more restless. Accountability, both worldly and divine, becomes a shadow that follows him everywhere. This is why Umar ibn al-Khattab, despite being one of the most powerful rulers in history, would tremble at the thought of failing his people. He once said, "If a single sheep were to die on the banks of the Euphrates out of negligence, I fear that Allah would hold me accountable for it." That fear was not weakness, it was strength. It was the kind of fear that kept him awake at night, walking the streets in disguise, listening to the cries of the poor. It was fear that pushed him to carry sacks of flour on his back instead of sending a servant. And it was fear that made him open to criticism, willing to be corrected by ordinary people, because he knew that leadership is not immunity from mistakes, but a heavier chain of accountability for them. Imagine if leaders today lived with that kind of fear. Imagine if every signature they placed on a policy reminded them that one day God will ask them, did this bring justice or oppression? Imagine if every dollar they spent from public funds weighed on their conscience as though it came directly from the pocket of a struggling family. If leaders truly believed that power was a trust from God, they would tremble before misusing it. They would measure success not by wealth or popularity, but by how faithfully they served those who trusted them. But this fear cannot be cultivated by leaders alone. It must be demanded by the people. When citizens remain silent in the face of corruption, they train their leaders to ignore accountability. When they speak with courage, they remind leaders of the truth that power is temporary, but judgment is eternal. This is why the Prophet Muhammad once said, "The best jihad is a word of truth in front of a tyrannical ruler." It is not the sword or the weapon that changes nations, but the courage to speak truth to power. It is the reminder that no ruler is above the law of God, no leader is free from responsibility, and no throne is safe from accountability. Consider the story of a woman during Umar's rule who stood up to him when he proposed limiting dowries. She recited verses from the Quran proving that he had no authority to do so. Umar did not silence her, nor did he punish her for speaking out. Instead, he admitted openly, the woman is right and Umar is wrong. That moment was not weakness, it was leadership. It showed that accountability is not humiliation, but humility, and that even the most powerful ruler must bow to the truth when it is presented. The relationship between people and their leaders is a contract, and in Islam, it is a sacred one. Leaders are reminded constantly that they will stand before God with no crown, no guards, no wealth, only their deeds. Citizens are reminded that silence in the face of injustice is complicity. Real change happens when these two truths meet, when leaders fear their Lord and when people fearlessly demand honesty. If citizens do not hold their leaders accountable, then leaders begin to worship their own power. They forget the weight of their duty and fall into arrogance. But when people rise, not with violence but with truth, not with hatred but with justice, they restore balance. They remind leaders that every decision has eternal consequences. And when a leader internalizes that fear of God, he no longer governs for himself, he governs as a servant, humbled by the enormity of his task. This is why accountability must never be negotiable. It is the lifeline of justice, the shield against tyranny, and the reminder that no matter how high someone climbs, God is always higher. When people demand accountability and leaders fear their responsibility before God, nations are built on trust instead of betrayal, hope instead of despair, service instead of exploitation. It is in that balance between people and power, between service and scrutiny, between justice and responsibility, that true leadership is born, and it is in that balance that societies find their strength. My friends, corruption has stolen too many dreams, silenced too many voices, and broken too many promises. But remember, this corruption does not survive because leaders are powerful. It survives because people grow silent. It survives because we allow dishonesty to feel normal. It survives because we stop demanding more. And so I ask you, if not us, then who? If not now, then when? If not here, then where? The Islamic model of leadership reminds us that power is not a throne, it is a trust. Leadership is not about privilege, it is about responsibility. And accountability is not optional, it is the very heartbeat of justice. So let us rise, not tomorrow, not someday, but today. Let us rise to demand honesty. Let us rise to expect service. Let us rise to remind every leader that they are not above us, they are among us, and they will answer before God for every choice they make. Say it again and again until it becomes unshakable. Leadership is service, not exploitation. Leadership is sacrifice, not luxury. Leadership is trust, not treasure. Do not wait for others to build this change. Do not wait for a savior to come. You are the spark. You are the voice. You are the generation that can end the cycle of corruption by refusing to bow to it any longer. And when history looks back, let it not say that we remained silent. Let it say we stood, we spoke, we demanded, and we changed. Because corruption ends the day people decide it must end, and justice begins the day people believe it can begin. So I leave you with this. Do not ask, what will they do for us? Ask, what will we demand of them? And remember, corrupt leaders fear only one thing more than losing power: facing a people who refuse to deceive. Be those people.